Hello, this is John Jacobs from the Village Chapel. I'm here with Paul Dunn, who is perhaps the foremost expert on Donald Ross, the father of golf architecture in America, and a person who was predominant in the history of Pinehurst as well as the Village Chapel. And so Paul is here to talk about some of the books that he's written concerning Donald Ross. And I think for all of us who are not only interested in golf and how it developed in this country, but also in the development of Pinehurst and the Village Chapel, I hope you'll give your attention to him. Paul, it is great to have you here with us. And perhaps as a way of beginning, there might be people out there watching this who really don't know very much about Donald Ross, but they probably know a great deal about golf. What contribution and what legacy does Donald Ross have in the way that we not only play golf in America, the kind of courses that so often we've experienced, but also just the very idea of a country club, a golf club in America. What did he contribute to all of that?
Well, there's a lot in that question. Ross is owed a lot by the people here and the people in the country. He literally devoted his entire life to golf. He started out humbly in Dornoch, Scotland. His family were stone cutters, stone masons, that sort of thing. His father had come to America years and years ago, but America to him was sort of a dream. He also was very pragmatic. He liked money. He didn't have any, but he knew you could make it. And he thought that there are a lot of rich men in America who would pay a lot of money to learn how to play golf. And he had this idea. He studied under old Tom Morris. Tom Morris had won the British Open. He was famous at St. Andrews, and St. Andrews was the premier course in the world and still is. He studied at Royal Dornoch Golf Course, where he grew up. He grew up in Dornoch. Dornoch is the town where Andrew Carnegie was born, and it's where Madonna got married. They have a beautiful course. If you ever go there, you'll be amazed. I mean, it's just fantastic. Mm-hmm. So he learned his craft there, and I have it in my notes here, but I think when he was 27, he came to America. And he first came to Massachusetts. He came to the Oakley Golf Course, where he was the pro. In just a short time there, he redesigned the entire course, rebuilt it, gave lessons, taught people the game. And fortunately for Pinehurst, and fortunately for him, the Tufts family, who were from that area, heard about him, and they were down here just starting this place to become a resort. And ironically, the Tufts knew nothing about golf. The first Tuft who came here saw people playing in a field one time with a golf ball, and this was his introduction to it. And put in a little 9-hole course. It was a terrible course. And people said, we really should have a good course. And to him, that was synonymous with perhaps being able to get Donald Ross to come here. Mm-hmm. And Ross came, and he spent his entire life here. He gave all of his years to golf. And curiously, the Tufts were very pragmatic, very smart, very ethical, very honorable people. They realized that Ross had ambitions that were greater than just working in one place and working on one resort. And in 1916, he was allowed to form a company called Donald J. Ross Associates. And the idea was he would not only work for the Tufts here, but he would be allowed to design courses for a lot of people around the United States.
And let me just stop you there for a moment. For those of us who don't play golf or who have never designed a golf course, he designed golf courses all over this country, designed courses 1, 2, and 3 here in Pinehurst. What exactly does it take to design a golf course in terms of time and effort?
Well, you have to start with the man. To design a great golf course, it's not a bad idea if you're also a great golfer.
Which he was.
Donald Ross had been in the British Open. He won the Massachusetts. He won everything down here. He was a champion golfer. His brother was better than he was. His brother won the U.S. Open. So they were quite a pair. So being a great golfer, he could look at the land and he could take his clubs, take a ball, and he could walk that land. He might walk it 100 times, but he'd try and figure out now, if I were to put the flag there, and there's some trees over here, and there's a mound of dirt over here, and so forth, he could try to figure out by hitting balls how that could play with all different kind of circumstances. Mm-hmm. And he also knew what a good golfer could do, and he also knew what a duffer could do. And he knew that if you're going to design successful courses, you have to have it set up in such a way that the good, the bad, and the ugly can play this course. And in that way, he was able to create courses that were, they didn't use the words in those days, but they were ecologically sound. He was an environmentalist. If he came to some huge boulders and so forth, today you might dynamite them out of the way or bulldoze them, but they didn't have those things. Mm-hmm. And they also didn't have much money. So as a Scotsman, he could figure out, well, why don't we take some bunkers and dig them over here, put that dirt on these boulders over here, and without spending much money at all, he's created an environment that was golfer-friendly, environmentally sound, quite an interesting man. So when he started his business, he hired 3 talented people, Walter Hatch, Jay McGovern, and Walter Irving Johnson. Excuse me. These are engineers. They weren't golf experts. These were men who understood engineering. And he taught them landscaping. And what they would do is they would go out, because in those days you didn't have an airplane. They would go to all these different places where a course was to be built, and they'd figure out the topography and send him designs of those topographies. Then he would sit down with his draftsman, Walter Irving Johnson, and they would actually then sit down and design how you could take that land and create the best layout for 18 holes, or sometimes just 9 holes. In the early days of golf, it was common to build 9 holes. You'd play it twice. So they'd put the tees in a different location, so it'd give you a different feel. So that was a common practice. He, believe it or not, was the only architect to design a golf course in tandem with a U.S. president. He designed the course in Warm Springs, Georgia, working with FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Mm-hmm. And sadly, that course may be totally eliminated, destroyed. It existed from, I think, 1925 until about 8 years ago, and I think it's just lying fallow now. After they cured polio, which is the reason FDR had gone down to Warm Springs, for years they would bring people down there, have one arm, one leg, and they would teach these people how to play golf on that course and how to become a golf manager or whatever. Thousands and thousands of people learned golf. When FDR was down there with him, he had a car he designed. He could drive this car with his hands because his legs were paralyzed. His friends from New York would come down to play, and they'd be going around this course, and he'd pull up in his car, no electric windows, the windows would be down. The guy next to him would have a pitcher of martinis, and Roosevelt would call his friends over, pour them some drinks, congratulate him on a great shot, and then drive around and visit some other golfers. But Ross was everywhere because a lot of great players came here and a lot of devoted advocates of golf came here. They would say to Ross, you know, we don't have a good golf course in our town. What could you do for us? Mm-hmm. And the next thing you know, he'd be out there doing this, designing courses. And I think he did 29 states. He was remarkable in that regard. Towards the end of his life, he created the American Association of Golf Course Architects. And they meet every year, and every man and some women now wear jackets with a Donald Ross tartan. And each year they give a Donald Ross award to the architect who, in their opinion, has done the most for the game of golf. Mm-hmm. So Ross is still remembered, and yet he's been dead since 1948. Right. Yeah.
So is it fair to say that, well, today we know about courses designed by Jack Nicklaus, number 9, the national course here in Pinehurst was designed by him. Courses designed by Arnold Palmer, and of course, courses designed by Robert Trent Jones. No relation to Bobby Jones, but still quite a few golf courses designed by these men. But yet, would you say that Donald Ross would be the father of American golf course architecture?
Yes, that's true. The other thing is, well, one thing I'll mention, last year a stamp came out for Arnold Palmer. If you go over our post office, you can put it, I put them on all my letters. Mm-hmm. Well, I've been trying to get a stamp for Donald Ross for 5 years. The post office is very hard to sell. And you'd think with Trump, who was a golf guy, mm-hmm. there might have been some interest in golf with his stamps, but he was. Roosevelt, on the other hand, was the stamp collecting president. Yeah, that's why they had so many stamps, because he was a collector. Before that, they used to put Lincoln on one, Ben Franklin on one, and Washington. That was about it. When Roosevelt came in and said, "Hey, we want to have all kinds of stamps," yeah. Roosevelt also kept a big white golf ball on his desk. And during the Great Depression, when times were really tough in this country, particularly for golf, they had what they called the WPA. And the WPA was the Works Progress Administration. He said, look, I want some of the money we're giving out for all kinds of things to go to golf. And the WPA commissioned golf courses. Donald Ross probably built 30 or 40 of those. There's one called Mark Twain up in New York State. They wanted a course. They met with Ross. He laid out the plans, and I think within 6 months that course was built and playing. In those days, you didn't have environmental studies and zoning concerns. You just did it. Mm-hmm. But he figured if you built a golf course, you'd have to employ a guy to build and design the clubhouse. you'd have to have an architect to build the course. You'd have to have a manager. You might have a pro. But, and his point was, you're going to have caddies. There are no golf carts. And the caddies were 10 cents a hole. So a caddy could make $1.80. And in the height of the Depression, if a kid could come home with $1.80 or $2 if the guy gave him $2,
Mm-hmm.
to Roosevelt, that was a great idea. Financially, he thought that was significant. And they did that for years.
I think it's interesting that Pinehurst was founded by a family, the Tufts, who invented the soda fountain. And every town, even small towns, could have a soda fountain, and they all wanted one because it would be a natural gathering place for the people of that town or village. And then one of those family members, James Walker Tufts, comes here and comes up with the idea of a golf course as a kind of country club and invites Donald Ross to come and basically provide I think what for most of this country would have been a prototype, the very first one. And I'm wondering, because it's always been my understanding that people from all over the country came to Pinehurst at that time in the early part of the 20th century to see what a country club would be like because they wanted one in their towns and cities. And is that fair to say?
Yeah, it was. There are a lot of cultural implications, but it was a sign you'd arrived when you could be a member of a country club. And golf was important, primary, but it was also a huge social phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you belonged to a country club. I had a grandfather, and he belonged to two.
He had really arrived.
He liked it. Yeah.
I think it's also interesting that these enlightened Victorians who founded Pinehurst brought experts here to be here at the inception of this community. James Walker Tufts brought Everett Hale to be the first pastor, the first chaplain of the village chapel. And he was the chaplain of the U.S. Senate. But they knew each other in Boston. So he wanted the church to have the best that he could find. And then to design the village, he brought in William Law Olmsted, who had designed, among other things around this country, Central Park in New York City. And then finally, who does he bring for golf? Donald Ross. So this was a place where these geniuses came together in their own ways to give us today what is Pinehurst.
Yeah, and if you read one thing people should realize is that we also live in a town where you have the Tufts Archives. So if you're really into golf and you go over to the Tufts Archive and everything's on microfiche, you can look at everything going back, and they had their own newspaper. So you can read week after week everything that went on here for 75 years or so. Mm-hmm. It was quite remarkable. Yeah.
Well, is there anything else you can tell us about Donald Ross in terms of not only what he provided to this community, but also so far beyond? You know, when you look at the list of golf courses that he designed, again, I would ask you the question: and every golf course is unique and distinct and different from any other. But typically, how long would it take him to design a golf course?
Well, that's a complex question.
Okay.
In the sense that it depended on the budget It depended on the topography, how challenging it might be.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there were some places where you'd look at the land and you say, I don't see what we could do with this.
Yeah.
Some were very tough. And you also realize some of these places were way up north. You only have very short seasons. It was a very different world. Since 1892, out of the first 117 U.S. Opens, 24 were held on a Ross course, 3 at Congressional, 4 at Inverness, 6 at Oakland Hills, and 3 at Oak Hills. And here in Pinehurst in 1999, 2005, and 2014, with a lot more coming.
Mm-hmm.
Of the 68 U.S. Women's Opens held since '46, his courses were selected 22 times, including Pine Needles and Pinehurst. Of the 21 Ryder Cups, 6 have been on Ross courses, including Pinehurst in 1951. And of the first 96 PGA championships, 17 were on Ross courses, including Pinehurst in 1936. So here's a man who, in '48, he'd probably been dead 75 years or something.
Mm-hmm.
And here, every 3-4 years, somewhere, one of these courses of his was picked for a championship. So that meant that not only did he create great courses, but they stayed great. In other words, modern golfers will design very differently because you have different balls, different clubs, different distances. But yet his are still contemporary. They're still playable, and they're still exciting. It's almost impossible to imagine a man could do that. But the evidence is in the fact that they're picked.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they don't come here to Pinehurst number 2 because there's a ring to it. They come here because even though it's been changed and modified over the years, this represents the best that there is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. So he set a standard. And when I've talked to people like Arnold Palmer and Nicklaus and Hogan, a lot of the guys, they will tell you that as far as they're concerned, this is the best, this is as good as you can get. Yeah.
Wow.
So he was recognized not just by the average guy, but by the tops in both play and architectural design. Yeah. He also built 2 in Cuba, and Castro was shown playing with guns on his hips after the revolution. And of course, Castro closed them both. And they were beautiful courses. Yeah. Yeah. And they were very exclusive. The president of Cuba could not join one of those clubs when he applied. Yeah.
Well, as someone who's not a golfer, can you tell me the difference between the great traditional courses and what a modern course might be like? And when I say great traditional, of course, St. Andrews, Augusta, designed by Bobby Jones,
Sure.
I think, and then Pinehurst number 2 by Donald Ross. What would be the difference between those courses and your typical modern course today?
Well, the truth is, there's no longer a typical course. You can literally do almost anything with the land today that you couldn't do in those days. So well, another thing is water. Today, designers love water. Ross hated water.
Mm-hmm.
Why? Because he's a Scotsman. Water meant a ball that was expensive could wind up in the water. And that was it. So he would try to design these courses where the last thing he would have ever wanted was a hole, would be a green in the middle of a lake or something. Today, that's considered terrific. That was anathema to Ross. Ross was this very tight Scotsman. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you a funny story. When I went to Dornoch to play Royal Dornoch and to visit the management there, we got talking about Ross. And for this book, I'll show you this book. This is the first book I did about Ross. I asked the manager, I said, could you talk to some people in town who might have known Donald Ross and tell me what they feel about him? he was their most famous guy. So anyway, we got to finish that book, and I realized I hadn't gotten this quote from this man. I got some beautiful pictures. This is Dornoch is one of the prettiest courses in the world. And I couldn't get the quote. So I said, I'm about to go to press. Could you send me a little something here about how do they feel about Ross? He says, I hate to tell you this, but I can't find anybody in town who's got a nice word to say about the man. I said, are you kidding me? He said, no. He said, whenever I ask him, what about Donald Ross? What do you think about Donald Ross? They'd always say, well, he wasn't nice to his mother. And he said, so I said, well, what does that mean? He wasn't nice to his mother. Well, to these cheap Scotsmen over there, if your son goes to America and they realize he must be a millionaire, he drove a big Packard car and they saw his picture in the paper all the time, he never sent much money back to his mother. So therefore, he was a cheapskate with his mother. I thought that was terrific.
Are there any other books here that you would like to?
This was another book I did with my wife. Great Donald Ross golf courses everyone can play. The reason for that title is that there are no private golf courses in this book. There are 100 courses, and if you wanted to play them, you just go up and play them. Private courses, you have to be a guest, and that wasn't the case here. The reason I did that was that I held a dinner here years ago and invited a lot of people to come and listen to people talk about Ross. And afterwards, people came up and they said, well, we don't know where his courses are. There was one book, this little book that the Tufts Archive used to print in for $10. And this tells you where all the courses are. But the average guy coming here, he'd leave here and go back to his home in Keokuk, Iowa, and wonder, well, where could I play a Ross course? So that was the genesis, a religious term. That was the genesis for this. We were able to, I had to research 325 courses, and I would give them an affidavit to sign and tell me, what did you pay the man, and so on. He typically built these courses for $500 to $1,000. $500. That's the fee he charged for the design. Now, at his peak, he had like 2,000 men working for him a year, building courses in Florida and Massachusetts, all over the place. But his fees were always low because he knew if he could get the fee, he could design the course, and then he could make some money on the building of it and the engineering and so forth. Yeah. But let me tell you something. In the 19 years between this book and this book, in Florida, the Ponce de Leon course, the Punta Gorda course, they both closed. In Georgia, the Roosevelt Memorial course that we talked about, that's lying fallow and may never open. And yet it's an historic course. In New Hampshire, a gorgeous course, the Balsams Panorama course, just beautiful. That's closed and has been closed for probably 7 or 8 years, maybe more. In North Carolina, right down here, Richmond Pines in Rockingham, that closed. That was a Lewis course. In Massachusetts, the Winchendon School Golf Club closed, and Petersham Golf Club. That land was sold by Harvard and closed. In Michigan, Rogel was named after Pete Rogel, a shortstop for the Detroit Tigers. Rogel, named after Pete Rogel of the Tigers, is now a cemetery.
Well, are they closing because in some way they're not as commercial?
They're closing
commercially appealing.
They're closing because land is so valuable.
Okay.
Let's assume you've got 100 acres down prime Florida area, and you're running a golf course and you're charging guys $50 a round or $25 a round, and you're making a little money. And a guy comes along and says, I'll give you $5 million for that piece of land to build some. That's hard to resist.
Sure.
So all these courses, famous as they are under great pressure, financial pressure. And during the COVID time, it was even worse. Imagine. And we've had First World War, killed golf. Second World War really killed golf. So lots of things happened to golf. And the land, though, is always rising in value. Yeah.
But after World War II, I mean, you had Eisenhower out there playing all the time. And didn't golf have a kind of comeback in the 50s and 60s?
What made golf was television.
Yes.
What made golf was Arnold Palmer.
Mm-hmm. Nicholas.
I mean, that's what brought attention to golf.
Mm-hmm.
And in this town, we had a man, John Durr. I don't know if you knew John. John Durr probably died about 5 or 6 years ago. He was the first TV golf reporter. Wonderful man. He could tell you stories you wouldn't believe. And he would go with Hogan over to the British Open. He could tell you every hole what stroke he did. He got this on this hole. He did this on that. John Durr lived in this town. Wrote about 5 good books on golf. And he's in this book. He wrote some things about one of the courses in that book that he was a member of.
Real quickly.
Yes.
You mentioned the way that Donald Ross looked at the topography of the course and tried to keep it as natural as possible. Is there a word for that kind of course? Is that what we call a links course?
No, links is just a style, the way the grass is and so forth. A links course is more of the kind of course he was familiar with in Scotland. He also knew that in Scotland, the king or the peasant could play the same course.
Mm-hmm.
It was very democratic. He was pleased to build a course for a bunch of rich guys, a private course. They wouldn't let a black member join. They wouldn't let women join. I mean, these guys, they wanted a certain way. He understood that, but he also understood that the game would only grow if the average man could be a golfer.
Mm-hmm.
So he favored municipal courses, built a ton of them. Ashborough up here, a little course, that's one of his. They're all over the place. I went by Ashborough one day and there was a Rolls Royce parked on that golf course. It was a local guy who was a pro down here who always drove a Rolls Royce. Yeah, but he also believed golf should be played by young people. He also did not like caddies gambling and cursing. He was a very strict guy.
Well, he was Scottish.
Well, he was a religious guy.
Yeah.
This course was called Shelby Golf Course. And one day, the new manager decides to rearrange this ratty office they had. And in this office, in a closet, there was an old galvanized can. And in that can were 9 architectural drawings. And they were from Donald Ross from 1930. They're 25 or something. They've been in there for 75 years. And he tells Vince Gill, who's a country singer, he tells Vince, look what we discovered. Vince Gill is a scratch golfer. So Vince says, wow, there's some land here that's open. Why don't we build a little junior course? So they take those plans and they shrink them. In other words, they kept the designs, but they shortened the distances. So they then had I think it's a par 26 kids course. Every year they have a Vinnie Gill tournament. They've raised millions of dollars. They have this beautiful $1 million clubhouse for kids. They have computers for these kids. A lot of these kids are inner city kids, and they don't have much money, and they're not going to be golfers. They give them balls, they give them clubs, they give them lessons, and they give them instructions on how to get into a college and how to write a job resume and all this stuff for kids. All because they found these old plans, Donald Ross plans.
Yes.
Yeah. I'll show you one other one. It's sort of interesting when you think of it. Golf is an interesting sport, and it attracts some remarkable people. But there's one here that I like to tell about. Striker. Striker is at Fort Bragg, and Tiger Young's father was a lieutenant colonel in the Army. And Tiger
Woods?
Yeah, Tiger Woods grew up over there. So after a U.S. Open, after a Masters tournament, Tiger got in a jet plane, flew up here to this base. Here's a picture of Tiger with these kids over there at that base. Now, to show you what kind of a guy Tiger Woods is, he flew up here, got in an Army uniform, ran 5 miles with the troops, went over to Air Force Base, Pope Air Force, and parachuted out twice. Then he went over here and invited every kid on that base to take lessons, and he taught them the game of golf.
Mm-hmm.
He has a charity. It's a huge charity, and that charity does nothing but all year round go around to golf courses teaching kids golf.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's Tiger. And now the poor guy's in bad shape.
Yeah.
But
getting back to Donald Ross, could you say something about some of the innovations that he brought to the construction of golf courses? One of the things that even I've heard of here in Pinehurst are the greens, and what he did differently about constructing greens that perhaps no one had ever seen in this country.
Well, see, he was, I don't like the word perfectionist, but he was the kind of guy, I guess is the way he was raised. He was raised to do things right.
Mm-hmm.
And let's assume he creates a golf course in some city, and his men design it and they build it. But he knew that that thing now has to be well cared for. It's not going to be great. So if you read his correspondence, he'd be writing to these people, you should use this kind of seed, not that. Get your seed here. You shouldn't pay any more than this. You should use so many pounds per acre. I mean, he was detailed in everything, very specific. And he would give people all this intricate knowledge rather than just build a court and leave it. The sad thing about his history is I used to be the country club historian, and I did it for, I think, 8 years. And I would go over there and I would go through a lot of files and so forth. The first thing you discover is there's almost no correspondence between him and the clubs. Here he designed 400 clubs, and there's no correspondence. He had a man who worked for him, but when he died, he took all that correspondence and burned it. Now, Diamond Head came in this town. Diamond Head had contempt for anything that wasn't theirs. So Diamond Head took all the files between Donald Ross and the Tufts and had them thrown in the dump. Fortunately, a secretary with some brains sent some caddies over there and put all that stuff in her garage. That's the basis for the Tufts archives. It's amazing there's anything left.
For historians, that's
sacrilege.
A kind of a blasphemy to throw away.
But think of this man that worked for him, his name was Nelson, and they worked together for like 30 years. He burned everything. Mm-hmm. And there's wonderment. Nobody can understand why, but you can only imagine Ross must have said to him, I don't want this, or God knows. Mm-hmm. But here this man did that. And he was a founder of the hospital and a top-notch guy, but he did that one act that I never understood it. Well, and his son's godfather was Donald Ross. As close as could be. You never know.
Well, there's no way to understand it. It's just a shame.
Yeah.
And there's so many other examples of that in history where letters, which are are windows into history in so many ways were not kept.
Well, see, as a historian, one of the things that bothers me is we live in this computer age. You can go over any place and find files. Mm-hmm. Now there are no files because people have everything in their computer. Sure. So the historian of the future is going to have problems. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, you're also an expert on Abraham Lincoln as a historian, and I'm hoping that one day in the future we can get back together and talk about him as well, as we have done in the past. But there are some people in our nation's history that you can never talk about them too much, and certainly Lincoln is one of them. And about Donald Ross, is there anything more you'd like to say?
Well, I'll tell you one funny story about writing these books. When the first book was finished, I got a call from a lawyer in Orlando, Florida. And he said, did you write this book? I said, yes. He said, there's a golf course down here called Mayfair. Why did you put it in that book? So I dug out my old files and went through it. And I said, for two reasons. One, they filled out an affidavit and they told me when it was built, how much they paid Ross, and told me all the stuff. So I said, I don't put anybody in that book unless they can certify it. But, and I'll get you the picture.
Sure.
Yeah. Delray, Florida. He probably built more courses in Florida than any place. Mm-hmm. Here, this is Mayfair.
Well, that's in Sanford. Okay.
Yeah, where Trayvon Martin was killed. Yeah. Right. So anyway, they said to me, why did you put him in there? And I said, well, the affidavit. Two, there's a sign there, a great big metal sign, and it says Seminole County Historical Association. And then it says Don Ross designed this course and gives a date. So I said between the sign and the affidavit, I put it in. So the lawyer said, well, the man who's renting that course from our city, we own it. The guy renting the course and running it read somewhere that Don Ross did not design it. And therefore, he's suing us for $1 million, claiming that we're defrauding him. Now, you're a lawyer, so you understand that people sue for lots of reasons, but that was the strangest lawsuit. So anyway, I said, well, I can only tell you what I have in my book here. They said, well, could you be our expert witness? I said, well, I don't know anything about this other than what I've told you. But I said, if I could help you, I'd be glad to. So they flew my wife and I down. I played the course. I went to the library and I interviewed people and spent probably 2 or 3 weeks down there researching this one little course. Mm-hmm. And Mo Norman used to like to play that course. It had an interesting history. So anyway, I went back and I found out that this course was on citrus land. This had been a big citrus area. Yeah. And the owner was wealthy. And the owner kept all of his mail, all of his correspondence. He had letters from all these different golf course designers asking him, how much would you charge me to build a golf course? So I'm looking at all these records from 1925 and 30s. Lots of information. Also, lots of magazine and newspaper articles about this course. So I learned more and more. And I said, you know, I'm having a problem. I said, I can't find anything where he's signed up Ross. His brother had designed a course further north, and he'd used Ross. And there's a letter from the brother saying to him, you should hire this great guy, Don Ross. He's fantastic. But I couldn't nail it exactly right. And yet we're going to go to trial, and I'm supposed to be the expert witness. So I said to him, I said there was a hurricane. They hired another guy to do some things. I found that there was this. I said, if I have to go on the stand, I have a problem here because I still don't have 100%.
Mhm.
So finally, he says, you're going to have to come down here. Your airline tickets are taken care of. We're going to trial. I said, okay, I'll do the best I can. About 2 days before, he says, don't come. It's all off. What happened? I said, the plaintiff dropped dead. I said, are you kidding me? This is 2 years of work.
Mhm.
He's a plaintiff tried. So finally, another year went by, and then they said, oh, we've settled with the widow. It was $1 million lawsuit. They didn't want to go to a jury, I guess.
Sure.
But I made more money on the lawsuit than I made on the book.
What a great story. Well, yeah,
I'll
Sanford.
tell you one other local story before I forget. This is a local story.
Okay.
Donald Ross did a lot of things. He would design a course. He would teach people the game. He would supervise the cat. He did everything. But he also had to pick members, because in those days, if you had a private course, like Pine Wild and Pine Needles, they had private memberships. Some were open, some weren't. Some were half and half. So he had to pick people. And one of the guys he picked was a guy, a clergyman by the name of Father Feeney. Now, Father Feeney could have been a Protestant Episcopal or a Catholic priest. I never knew what Father Feeney was, but he was a golfer
Mhm.
and a golf nut. And he played at Pine Needles. So anyway, there's a letter in the files, and it's a letter from Donald Ross to Mr. Trump. He never called him Leonard, or it was always, Dear Mr. Trump.
You mean Tufts?
Yeah,
Tufts.
subject, Father Feeney. Dear Mr. Tufts, Father Feeney again has created a problem. The problem is we had a tournament, and the problem is the three gentlemen who played with him refused to sign the card. And the reason they refused to sign the card is Father Feeney again cheated on his score. And I don't know what we're going to do, but these men don't want him in the club. So it says, it's written on the side something, fire him or kick him out or whatever. But that was also what Ross had to do. He had to manage and find people and police the memberships and everything else.
Well, I think we have time for one last question,
Yes, sir.
and we could go on for hours. This
Okay.
is so fascinating. But you said you played the course in Sanford in preparation for your expert testimony. Sanford is, about 25, 30 miles north of Orlando on the St. Johns River.
Right.
I know it very well. But just like you can read a book without knowing who the author is, and sometimes know that it's Hemingway, or it's Fitzgerald, or it's Mark Twain. And sometimes you can see a film, and without knowing anything else about it, you can tell that it was directed by Steven Spielberg or Stanley Kubrick. Can you play a golf course like the one you played at Sanford, where the design of it was in question, and just know, because of what you know about Donald Ross, he designed this course, or not?
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the lawsuit. In the lawsuit, I was the expert witness for the city.
Right.
The expert witness for the plaintiff was the president of the Donald Ross Society.
Wow.
Okay? So I read the deposition. They deposed him.
Mm-hmm.
I also should tell you that I was asking, I think, $100 an hour. He was getting $350. But anyway, they said, did you play the course? No. Did you walk the course? No. What did you do? He said, I drove around in my car, and I could tell by looking at it there was not a Ross course. Now, that's a ballsy statement.
Mm-hmm.
So I said to myself, so anyway, they showed me the deposition, and I said, well, let me tell you something. I said, I found a man who lives in Monroe. Monroe is in North Carolina, up the road. And I think there's a Ross course there. This man had been the manager of Sanford, of the Mayfair Golf Course,
Hmm.
way back. And his father before him had managed it. So there were two guys. And I interviewed him, and I said, can you tell me if Ross designed that course? He said, we always thought he did. He said, Snead and Hogan used to stay at my house when they came through. This was in a day when the guys didn't have any money. He said, they all believed it was a Ross course.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, we did something that I think suggests that we thought it was a Ross course, because when we designed some of the greens, Ross's signature green was a turtleback. Mm-hmm. If you go over here and play this course, you can hit the ball up and it'll go right off the back. And you can run back and come back. John Daly took an 11 once over there, one hole. But anyway, he said, we designed these greens, some of these greens, with a more turtle look than what we found after 60 or 70 years of erosion and hurricanes and everything else. Florida courses suffer a lot because of the weather. But anyway, I thought, well, that was an interesting thing, and I had that as part of my testimony. The other thing I did was I contacted a European golf journal, a journal that's very serious about golf. And I said, would you like to run an article about this controversy over this course? Mm-hmm. Yes. So I said to the lawyer, would you like me to get that done? Because that could be sort of a credential, it's a prominent golf journal accepting our thesis. I said, great. So the reason I was interested in doing that was I needed a new TV set. And I priced the TV set and I priced the stand. It came to $1,300. So I said, would 13 hours be fair compensation for me to write this article? I said, no, that sounds good. So I wrote the article and got my $1,300, and everybody came out a winner. But the truth was that that particular story has interested a lot of golf course architects, mm-hmm. because how often does a golf course wind up in a lawsuit, $1 million lawsuit?
It's the first I've heard. That's a fascinating story, and we could talk more about it. But I think we've gone as far as we can go for today.
Well, I enjoyed being with you.
I've enjoyed having you here, and I just want you to know, Paul, what an asset you are to this community and to this church, and anyone who cares as much about history as you do is a brother of mine, as far as I'm concerned. So again, I thank you, and I hope we can have you back again to talk about Abraham Lincoln and anyone else you'd like to talk about.
Well, that's very kind.